Tshelo bani ningacula umculo wethu lapho sohlangana khona kuzophela abantu.
Tshelo bani
Ningacula umculo wethu lapho sohlangana khona kuzophela abantu.
So without wasting time, I would like to welcome Karabo Kgoleng, the facilitator, and Chris and Jassy. Welcome on stage.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. It's so awesome of you to support this festival. And there's a book that's edited by Michael Chapman that has writings by some of the writers who have visited this festival, and they've contributed short stories or their thoughts about the festival. I personally think, as a books critic, that it's too short. But it's well worth it and it's brilliant. So, well done. That's for the Time of the Writer. Give the Time of the Writer a round of applause. Over 300 writers in the last 15 years from around the world have come to this festival and shared their experiences with us. If it wasn't for this festival, there are so many writers whose work I would probably have not discovered. And if I had, it would have cost me quite a bit to get access to that work, because when writers who are not published in South Africa, but who write stories that resonate with us as an audience, when they come to this festival, their books end up being distributed here. And Adam's Books also make sure that they have the copies available. So please, can we have a round of applause for Cecil and his team at Adam's Books. They're doing an amazing job. I'm going to talk about crime scene. And what's really unique about Chris and Jassy is that they did other things that entailed a lot of writing, but they would not have been classified as writers until they'd published books. Chris's first book that he published was banned by the Bar Association. If you were here on the opening night, you'd know this. And Jassy's an editor of a magazine that does not have characters as sexy as Jade de Jong. So I think it's really amazing. And I want to begin by talking about this career shift. A lot of careers entail writing. People think that writing is either a hobby or something that best-selling writers do who sell books. But writing is an intrinsic part of your work. And it's an intrinsic part of your existence and your experience. If you're going to be an active and contributing member of society, you have to do some writing, even if it's an email or it's a post on Facebook or it's a tweet. If you want to be taken seriously, if you want to measure up, you have to do some writing. I don't know of any degrees that you can get at tertiary institutions that don't require any writing. If they do, then I stand to be corrected. But yeah, writing is not something that's left to a certain corner of society. It's something that we all do, because that's how we all connect with each other. Language is an amazing medium with which we get to explain what's going on in our heads, and we form these ideas and we want to express them to someone else. We use a code that we both agree on, that we understand, although things get lost and people disagree because we all have our own imaginations and our own interpretations and experiences of reality. But at the end of the day, we're able to deliver this message. And it's the one instinct, language, it's the one instinct that is unique to humanity. So I think words are brilliant. And if you think that they don't matter, then you don't matter, as far as I'm concerned. But let's talk about career shift before we go into the books briefly. And we're going to follow the same model. And now I must look at my watch. So when it says 9:30, it's over. And yeah, so says the theater. So let's talk about the career shift first. When did you realize that your career would require such a great amount of writing, and how did you reconcile that with your new lives or the evolution of your lives to involve writing that is more creative and that asks for more engagement? Can you just give us a brief trajectory of your careers to this point so far, Jassy?
Well, I've always loved writing, and when I had the opportunity to move into a career that involved writing, I embraced it, even though, of course, at that stage, there was no such thing as a private investigator in my daily work. Working for a hairdressing magazine, it was more about perms, relaxers, the latest fashion colors. So very, very different. And still, in spite of working in this industry, it didn't really alter the fact at all that I am, and I always have been, an absolutely avid reader of thrillers and crime fiction. I adore them. And when the time came to start writing them, I must say, I did find it a little bit stressful, because there's something very, very strange about holding a conversation with a person, and this is what I found personally. You know, and on the one hand, you're sort of talking and responding as normal to whoever it might be, and on the other hand, this part of your brain that you didn't even know existed is pondering the logistics of whether it would be possible to suffocate them using cling film. And it's a very strange thing. You're sort of not thinking with your own mind anymore. You're thinking with the minds of all the people you're writing about, and some of them are bad and evil people. So it was difficult for me being a hair and beauty editor, and for a lawyer, I'm sure it must have been even more of a stretch.
Well, I think the mistake you're making is to think that I think of myself as a lawyer. I wanted to be a professional tennis player. And then I wanted to be a doctor. And neither of those require writing. In fact, a lot of the professional tennis players today, I realize, are almost illiterate because they left school at age 10 or 12.
But guys like Andre Agassi end up having biographies written about them anyway.
And that's a very good one, by the way.
Yeah.
But I then fell into law. I never realized how much writing there was. The first thing I wrote was a charge sheet. I was a prosecutor, and I had to write down in legal English or legalese what the charge was that the man was facing. And that required some very disciplined writing within a particular formula. And that formula and that discipline became stricter and greater and stricter as I developed in practice, until it became very, very difficult writing and very long documents. But what I was writing then was I was always writing someone else's story. There was nothing creative about it. I was in the position where I had to shape what people were telling me into a legally acceptable form or format. That's not creative at all. It's almost like editing. And of course, the ethics of my profession prohibited absolutely adding an input of my own, creating anything in it, suggesting anything. So I realized at around about the age of 50, which was last year, that I actually wanted another career. I wanted to be something else. I came here, I think I said earlier, in 2007, and I sat more or less there, halfway up, watching the writers who had come from far afield to talk about themselves. And at the introductions, I realized that they were people like me, people who were holding down a job, doing one thing, but writing as well, with this desire to write. And that sort of motivated me to do something serious about it, and then I wrote Shepherds and Butchers. I had done the research, but then I really put my mind to it and wrote the book. I found it incredibly difficult to go from writing other people's stories to creating a new story. And I must tell you, the first draft was absolutely awful. My editors, and Jassy knows the editor, it's Frederick de Jager of Umuzi. He sat me down, and there were about 720 changes that they wanted to make to my manuscript. But anyway, since then I've learned that the editing process is an important part of it. And the writing has become a lot easier.
Having said that, though, it may appear on the surface that the careers that you were involved in may not have directly led to what you do today, but did they teach you anything about what it requires from you to be able to produce the work that you produce? I mean, you know, being a beauty editor, perhaps it made Jade de Jong seem as gorgeous as she seems. I mean, I can imagine who had cast in the film of that, because your novels about Jade's sleuthing work, they read like film scripts. And it's the same thing with your work, Chris, that you needed an understanding of, you know, going through the drudgery of figuring out cases and presenting them to court and sifting through lots and lots and lots of information to find the hidden story that you decide to recast as historical fiction in the manner that you do.
I think that any writing, if you are a writer by nature, helps you hone your craft. And I was actually talking about this this morning when I was talking to some students. I think there is a rule of thumb in writing that your first 1,000,000 words are practice. And luckily for writers who have a day job doing writing, I don't think it matters what those 1,000,000 words are, whether they're an editorial on catwalk trends or whether they're a gritty paragraph about the heroine stuck in a dangerous situation where she's desperately trying to break free. So I think that developing a writing voice for me was something that I was lucky enough to do during the years of doing my day job, and it was fairly easy then to apply that voice to writing crime fiction. I already had the voice, it was just a case of adapting it slightly to the genre, because the genre does have its own requirements. It doesn't do to be too poetic when you're writing crime fiction. Well, I don't think so. And on the occasions when I thought so, my editor usually didn't. So again, we had a bit of friendly conflict. In fact, slightly off the subject, my editor also thought that the approximate length that a love scene should be was about 3 words, which in my first novel, I sweated and toiled. I can't explain how difficult and how demanding it was to write my first ever, very brief, a couple of paragraphs at most, scene where the hero and the heroine finally managed to briefly stop fighting for long enough to actually jump into bed together. And I described all this in 2 very swift paragraphs, and it went off for editing, and when it came back, the editor had edited just about all of it out. And she said, no, crime readers don't want to read about that. So there was my hotly anticipated love scene was cut down to a few short words.
I think what Jassy and I have in common, she's a journalist and I, until last year, was a lawyer, is that within our professions were certain requirements in our writing. And mostly it was about reporting facts. And it was also about the economy of words. So I think you will find, if you compare our styles, that we tend to write using short words, short sentences, and short paragraphs, with one central idea per paragraph. It makes it a lot easier when you write like that, but it makes it very difficult to find the 100,000 words that your editor or your publisher wants for a book, because we can tell our story in far fewer words, and then, of course, no one will read the books.
All right, so now we're going to get into the theme of the discussion, which is crime scene, which I can do anything with, because, it's all about crime. And we're going to look at the similarities and differences between what Chris writes about and what Jassy writes about, in terms of, just dealing with the genre and their application and the way that they write. Because the thing is with crime fiction, and I suppose crime fiction or crime writing, and one of the reasons why it's so popular is because we hurt each other as people, And once that's done, everyone remembers it differently. And the objective, or what the law tries to help you do, is to find the justice. But sometimes, you're confronted with situations where you don't have enough power and you're given justification, but you know that this is not an accurate representation of the truth. And where does the justice come? How does the justice come? And in many discussions that happen around writing about crime and how literature about crime, gets to the public and why it's so popular, particularly the fictional one or the non-fiction one where the crime gets solved, is that the crime does get solved. But we're going to look into questions about, what are those crimes and, how do you address issues of accountability and all of that, and then we'll open up the floor. But first, I'd like Chris to begin by reading from his latest book, A Sailor's Honor, and he's also written about Clarence van Buren. Do you still want to read from that, Chris?
Yes, my Jamaican friends over there want to hear some Afrikaans.
And if it's in Afrikaans, and if it's in Afrikaans.
It'll be a very short section.
Yeah, okay, cool. And then what you can do is also just give a background to the reading before you do it in the Afrikaans book so that those who don't understand the language will get it, because
Yes, I'll do that.
Somebody missing here was supposed to do the translation.
I'll do that. I disagree with Jassy's editor about people reading crime novels not being interested in love and sex.
I disagree with it too.
Yes, as a matter of
The
fact.
best sex scenes are in crime novels.
Yes, as a matter of fact, my next book is going to be a love story, a love story about crime, or love as crime. Because I firmly believe that more people have been wounded by love than by bullets. So I'm going to read from A Sailor's Honor a short passage about a policeman who is a loving husband and a good father, and who at the end of the book kills 2 people. And you will now wonder, what sort of a man kills when it actually is not really necessary? What would it take to make a man kill? But the book starts early on with de Villiers having been on a stakeout where he watched a drug deal going down, and then he goes home early. And I'll read from there. When he had seen enough, de Villiers started his unmarked Holden and drove home. It was too late to drive all the way back to his office, only to have to drive back home again when he arrived, so he went home early. The rain arrived before he did, a sudden downpour, Auckland weather, clear the one moment, foul the next. He found his wife in the kitchen. She had her back to him and was busy stacking plates in the dishwasher. "Where is Zoe?" he asked, hugging her from behind. "Hello," Emma said, "and I love you too." He pushed his hands into the front of her jeans. "Hello," he said, "where is Zoe?" Her breathing quickened. It's Monday and they stay late at school on Mondays, and don't pretend that you don't know that. Kiwi kids are bred tough and they play their sport in all weather. Zoe would come home soaked but happy, they knew. "Let's make love," he said. "What?" "Here," she teased, "in front of the dishwasher." He led her upstairs. Outside, the rain pelted down on the pressed aluminium roof tiles and gushed out of the downpipes into the drains. The passing cars threw up sheets of spray. Scholars walked past the house, bent over in the wind, hugging their bags in front of them to protect their books. Upstairs, above their heads, de Villiers and his wife made love. Sex on a weekday afternoon. It lifts the gloom. Anyway, then for my Jamaican friends over there, the guys who have been doing all the heckling. You see what I mean? They're great company, by the way. You should try to shake their hands. Anyway, I'm going to read from a death sentence scene in a courtroom. This is a real scene. It happened here in Durban in the High Court in 1957. It's in Afrikaans. Most people here will understand, but the Jamaicans will work out what happened. The last line in English would be, "You will be taken away from here to a place of safety, and you will be kept there until the day that you will be hanged by the neck until you're dead." Anyway, in Afrikaans it goes as follows. Toe die regter en assessore terugkeer, moes Van Buren opstaan terwyl die regter hom aanspreek. Ons is eenparig van mening dat daar geen versagtende omstandighede is nie. Het jy enigiets te sê voordat vonnis uitgespreek word? Van Buren. Ek het alles gesê wat daar te sê is. Daar is niks meer wat ek kan sê nie. Quick translation. Do you have anything to say before sentence is passed? And the man says, I've said everything there is to say. There is nothing more I can say. The judge then continues. Ek dink nie dat jy kan sê dat jy nie 'n regverdige verhoor gehad het nie. Die prokureur-generaal het nie sy saak oormatig sterk beklemtoon nie en jy is op 'n bekwame wyse verdedig. In die afwesigheid van versagtende omstandighede lê ek die enigste vonnis op wat die hof toelaat, dat jy teruggeneem word in aanhouding en dat jy aan jou nek gehang word tot jy dood is. Those last words, that you be taken away from here to a place of safety and be kept there until you be hanged by the neck until you're dead.
The piece that I'm going to read here comes from a section of the book where my heroine has been careless enough to allow herself to get captured by the baddies. She's been tied back to back with the woman that she was hoping to come and rescue, and she is now being taken out to sea. The first person who speaks is the other woman she is with. This is all so unfair. Another sob. If Jade's hands had been free, she would have grabbed the other woman and shaken her in frustration. Here they were, just minutes from certain death, and instead of listening to Jade's escape plan, all Monique could do was whine on about how none of this had been her fault. Listen, this is important. We need to go over. And then, abruptly, the engine cut out and the boat stopped moving forwards. They coasted to a stop, the craft rocking gently on the waves. If Bradley had reached his intended location, it might already be too late for her plan to work. Pull him up, Bradley's voice. What was going on? Jade craned her neck, struggling to see. The beam of a flashlight pierced the darkness, momentarily dazzling her, and she heard a dull, scraping sound. Sneaking another look, she saw the guard was gripping the torch in his teeth, holding the unconscious Neil by his shoulders, while Bradley worked on his legs. Attaching what Jade now saw was a heavy-looking concrete block with a rough hole through its center. Go overboard with one of those lashed to your ankles, and you would never come up for air again, she thought. We have to jump over the side, Jade whispered. It's our only chance. My left, your right. Count of 3. She felt Monique tense. Then she squeezed Jade's finger in response. Finally, the scuba instructor had listened to her. Jade breathed in, deep, fast breaths, forcing her lungs to take in as much air as they could, then pushing it out again, oxygenating her blood to give her the best possible chance of survival when they were under the water. 1, another breath. 2, Jade eased her legs as far underneath her as they would go. 3, they struggled to their feet, limbs tangled, fighting for balance on the slippery bottom of the boat. It was not the quick and easy maneuver she had hoped for, that was for sure. It was more like a free-for-all. And then she heard Monique scream, "Help, don't!" The torch beam swung in their direction again, and with a cold rush of terror, Jade knew that they had been too slow. And then she did it. A desperate sideways lunge took them over the edge of the boat. Jade gulped in as much air as she could as they tipped into the cold, heaving sea. But as they fell, a gunshot split the air, and Jade felt Monique's body convulse. As they sank deeper under the water, she realized that her worst nightmare had come true. The dive instructor had been shot. She was not moving, and her body was slack. And now, whether she lived or died, Jade was joined to her by a tough and unbreakable length of wire.
Some girl-on-girl action over there. Seriously, you could send that to Playboy, yeah? Heaving seas and lots of water, girls tied to each other, and very sexy, very sexy. Now, Tess Gerritson's, she's one of those serious, best-selling thriller writers. She could be compared to, just thinking, Stephen King is more horror. She's like the James Patterson, the female James Patterson, the US, more or less. She's on that tip. And she did the shout on the cover of Worst Case. She says it's a white knuckle thriller with an utterly chilling finale, so nice. And if Tess Jerrison gave it a shout, that means that it should be available in the States or somewhere.
It is coming out in the States. It's going to be published under a different title. It's going to be called The Fallen, and it's actually coming out in April in the US and Canada.
And Shepherds and Butchers also reads like a drama. And I think it's going to be dramatized for the big screen.
Yes.
Is that right, Chris?
Yes, I sold the film rights to Anand Singh,
Wowzers.
and they've already appointed a director, Oliver Schmitz,
Wow.
who's done a recent award-winning movie. I've now forgotten the title. Help me. There it is, Life
Life
Above All.
Above All.
And I've seen the script. I'm hoping that they will have Charlize Theron as prosecuting counsel. They changed one of the characters. Instead of a man prosecuting, they have a woman. And as I say, my wife will forgive me for my daydream.
Well done. I mean, Anand Singh, you know, he puts it onto the screen. He's
Yes.
got a bit of buck supporting that, and you know, he's got the distribution thing. So congratulations.
Thank you very much.
It's really fantastic. It's incredibly exciting that our writers are inspiring the world and inspiring other forms of just getting the stories to people in the manner in which they can respond the best to it. So I think it's great. Now, looking at the issue of crime and where your stories are set, in terms of how you deal with crime in both your books, what can you tell us about where the crimes take place and who's involved in the crimes from a micro to a macro level? Jassy.
My books are generally based in Joburg, although from time to time my heroine does travel. There being no ocean in Joburg, we obviously had to make a little bit of a plan for worst case. Just wouldn't have been the same in the Yuxke. Wouldn't have had the same drama.
Yeah.
But I think that, you know, crime fiction is very, very much a commentary on any society. And it being so, it does give you the opportunity to sort of poke the finger. And I have sort of poked a bit of criticism and a bit of fun at the powers that be. But generally, I've found in my books the themes that I tend to address are quite often not so much government type of politics as really the power and the corruption and the unfairness and the greed and the devastation that big business and big corporations can actually wreak. In worst case, the angle is an environmental one. In my latest book, Pale Horses, the angle is something different. I explore the threat that big business that is sort of propagating genetically modified seeds upon the world is actually posing.
And in My Brother's Keeper, you look at the issue of property development and how it's got a really ugly face in Johannesburg.
Yes.
And land is a big issue in South Africa.
Yes.
And corporations somehow they don't seem to be in, you know, they seem to stand back when it comes to
Yes,
bringing
it's
that up.
the interests of the developers are put above all other interests, and that's very, very often how it is. And I think that, you know, in a way, quite often big business and government are very frequent and very, very close bedfellows, and fairly often, maybe not here so much, but in the States a lot, when you're criticizing government and government decisions, you should really be looking at who's actually lobbying for making those decisions. And so that's my angle that I just seem to have chosen, because I believe that is my way of exposing that unfairness and of hopefully making readers think about who's really pushing the buttons when it comes to decisions being made.
So your crime scene is set, the backdrop is the private sector.
More often than not, although I can't say it will remain the same for future books, because you know, depending on the plot may dictate otherwise. But for now, I felt that I'm more comfortable in that playing field, and I can choose my themes and criticize and explore.
Now, Chris, your crimes, how do they take place? Do they take place in a macro, micro, from which perspective?
Yeah, you know, I never thought of myself as a crime writer. I didn't try to do that. I've been labelled a crime writer by Mike Nicol in Cape Town, and at first I objected, and then when I looked closely at the 3 books I've written, I saw there that I was actually a crime writer, but my crime is not about individual crime, a murder here, and the writer has to solve it through a private detective or a policeman. It was about state crime. I felt in Shepherds and Butchers that the way the apartheid government had gone about the death penalty and the execution process, and the way they treated both the prisoners and the people who worked on death row was a crime. I have no other word for it, and in my subsequent books I did much the same. My take on it is this: in a democratic society, you give your politicians the authority to do things on your behalf. That authority is meaningless and useless until you also give them your taxes, so that they can actually afford to execute their plans, or the plans that they are authorized to execute on your behalf. But what happens invariably in all governments, and this is not an African thing, I want to make that plain, is that the politicians, once voted into power, abuse the authority that they have with the taxpayers' money to conduct illegal operations, to instigate wars, to undermine governments, to do all sorts of nefarious things with your authority and your money. Now, I object to that, and I think I have this natural streak of being a rebel inside me, and I'm angry with the apartheid government because they sold my birthright for short-term benefits for a very few people, and I'm still exposing their crimes. I haven't got to the current government yet. I think other people can write better about them, but I'm taking on the old enemy, and I'm exposing their crimes, and I'm trying to do it in the form of a novel. My characters are Durban people. My heroes are Durban people. They're good guys. Johan Weber. Johan Weber is a local lawyer. Pierre de Villiers is a soldier. He's a bit of a Pretoria boykie, but he always comes to Durban to see his brother-in-law here. And then I've got a very interesting guy who's going to feature in the next book. His name is James Mazibuko, and he is a cash-in-transit robber.
I haven't read Clarence van Buren because my Afrikaans is shocking. I can tell you drug names in Afrikaans because that's what I had to study, was the names of medications. Otherwise, I missed out on that. But the English translation should be out next year, no?
No. June, July. My deadline is end of April.
Great. Okay. So, yeah, that's great news.
And that is not fiction. That's a non-fiction.
Yeah,
work.
that's non-fiction. But in terms of the protagonists in your fiction stories, what I find fascinating about them is that they all have a great deal of bomskok. And there's this hidden, the big elephant that's sitting in the room with you is that middle-aged white guy who was involved in Kuvut and went to the border. He's not Peter Rovik, though. Peter Rovik was a surfer, Subilak. And, he organizes this festival, so it's cool. But the thing is, the big elephant in the room in South Africa is this guy that was born, bred, and buttered to believe that he was always going to be the man in charge all the time. And then he had all that taken away from him. And he has to deal with women as equals. He has to deal with black people as human beings. And he has to deal with himself, with his sense of loss and his guilt. And the space where he comes from culturally that informed his reality does not allow for any of that to happen. And these guys are hanging around us. They're the guys who, they pull out a gun in the middle of a road rage incident and they'll pump a few bullets into your head. They're the guys who have nervous breakdowns and kill their families and kill themselves. And they're also something that we need to heal in this society. I think we need to find a space, and they also need to find those spaces, but how do you deal with that? And I think it's good that we have some of these conversations, and they are showing up in a lot of crime fiction that we're reading. What I can draw that's parallel, or actually that's the same with this, would be Detective Kgoleng in 13 Hours, Dion Meyo's book that came out last year. This guy is also, he's got issues. And these are not bad people, but they're also victims of something that was meant to make them come out on top and put them on top, but it also robbed them of the space to also be human and to be vulnerable. And I think it's important to acknowledge that because Mandela, our daddy, said so. Other interesting differences in Jassy's books and Chris's books, and I'm speaking from the crime fiction perspective, is talking about the troubled people. Your sleuths are these troubled individuals. De Jong is pretty together, and she decides she wants to fix things and doesn't mess with her too much. And obviously, there's a lot of historical fiction that Chris uses from his background in his work that he weaves into this. So some of what you read in his work is actually true. The apartheid government did try and take out Mugabe, and Chris was involved in the legal aspect of that. And Jassy's stories are contemporary, but they're also based on what's happening. So it's sort of a more contemporary historical fiction. It's time to open up to the floor. Who's got any questions? Please raise your hands. And while you do, and the mic goes to you, is anyone ready to ask any questions? Hello, hello. David, in front. Not David, who? Shabnam.
Hi, guys.
Good afternoon, good evening.
Okay. No, actually, it's just a comment. I wanted to say firstly that I as I'm sitting here, I realized I really respect and admire crime writers because it's, I mean, I write too, right? So I realized it's something you have to deeply plot. You have to spend a lot of time plotting it. You have to understand how tight it is. And the other thing I realized is it's a lot of description, right? And you're doing a lot of straightforward description. And it's very hard to do that realistically. So this is just my comment. Those two things are very difficult things. And I admire anyone who can do that well and do it many times with so many books. Yeah, so good for you guys.
Yeah, great
Thank
comment.
you.
Thank you very much.
Cedric, book dealer extraordinaire.
Yes, and thank you for that.
Thanks, Karabo, and thanks, Chris. And thanks, Jassy, for the suggestion of the cling wrap. I made a note to take some next time I go to my mother-in-law.
Oh.
Sorry, just joking. We're very close, or we were when she was alive. Sorry. Sorry, that was totally unintentional. Jassy, two questions. Following on from the cling wrap, as an editor of a hair products magazine or the hair industry, have you used any of the hair products to kill some of your characters? Or the villains killing off your characters? That's the one question. And the other one, I think the audience would like to hear more about your mentor, Modesty Blaze.
Oh, well, as far as the hair products go, I've always tried to keep the day job and the creative side separate. I feel it makes for a calmer existence in both spheres of my life. But yes, when you mentioned Modesty Blaze, she was a character who actually came to life in a cartoon strip. I think it was sort of like a cartoon in the, I don't know, mid-1900s, thereabouts, even earlier. And then the cartoon writer, Peter O'Donnell, actually wrote books about her. And she was a divinely cool woman. And I was quite young when I read the Modesty Blaze books. And she really stuck in my mind as being the most fantastic role model, because what I liked about her was that she was a criminal. She ran a large criminal gang, but yet, within the fact that, you know, she used to sort of heist gold and these kind of things, she would make these wonderful, humane decisions that were kind of also influenced by her being a woman, and which the men in her gang used to sort of sometimes scoff at and disregard. For instance, if they couldn't do an operation without 2 innocent guards getting killed, then she would leave that operation. And I was really fascinated by the contradiction of having this absolutely ruthless killing machine woman who operated in the underworld and who yet had this amazing, friendly, normal side, and who had a kind side. And that's something that I definitely kept in mind when I was thinking about creating Jade and thinking about the qualities that I wanted Jade to have. And I just tried to take those qualities, and then obviously, you know, every character is different. You can't base one on another. But I like to think that if Jade and Modesty Blaze had met, they would have got on very well and gone and had wine together.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Firstly, I would like to know, both of Jason and Chris, that why actually they've just decided to write about crime. Maybe it's because there are some of the incidents that actually happened to them, or what. And then another question is, who are actually were inspiring you in terms of going for writing, your role models, that, you know, these people, they actually encourage me that I have to go for this. Thank you.
I think I'll take that. The second question first. I think most of us want to tell a story. And in order to reach a larger audience, you have to do it in writing. I grew up in an environment where we sat around the fire with the people who worked on the farm, which we regarded as our family farm, and they were telling stories. And there were stories being told around the dinner table, and we listened to stories on the radio. But every one of those stories had a background in someone actually writing them down. Even Little Red Riding Hood started many hundreds of years ago as a story which was a caution against girls going into dangerous places. And it changed into the story we all know well, but it had to be written down by someone, whether it was the Grimm brothers or somebody else. I think that's what drives us. We want to tell a story, and we want to entertain, and that turns into a book. I've forgotten what the first question was.
Why did you decide to write about crime?
Why did we decide to write about crime? I think my and Jassy's answers are going to differ here. I saw crime within things during the apartheid era which were done in secret. And that brings me actually to the theme of this Time of the Writer this week. And that is governments doing things in our name, with our money, in secret. And you only need to do those things in secret when they are unlawful and illegal and harmful and are things that they would do, or rather that they would know, we would disagree with if they told us what they were going to do. And I fear that that is, in fact, the purpose of this so-called Protection of Information Bill, which is currently the matter of discussion. They want to hide from us the things that they're going to do with our money and our authority, which is going to be illegal. And my writing is about exposing those that happened in the past as apartheid crimes, if you want to call them that. I just call them crimes because the other label matters nothing at all. It doesn't matter which government does it. If it's illegal, it's illegal.
I started writing crime fiction because I love reading it. We discussed this briefly at the beginning. I think crime fiction is immensely, immensely satisfying to read as a genre, and it's mainly because all of us, in every country around the world, and particularly here in South Africa, we are exposed to crime. And however we deal with it, the reality is that it's a troubling, a brutal, and a horrible part of life. And what crime fiction does, and I found this reading and writing about it, is it puts it into a perspective where you can immerse yourself in a story that has a satisfying conclusion. In most cases, justice is done. If justice is not done for whatever reason, because the writer is, has chosen a more unusual approach, you still get the catharsis of a good ending that happens within 300 odd pages and within however long it takes you to read the book, rather than remaining unresolved or dragging out in a month-long painful trial that then carries on to the next year and the year after that. So what I really love about crime fiction is the way that it makes reality better in so many different ways. It allows you to sort of transcend the unfairness of crime in real life and put it in a conclusion where between two covers, for a short while, the world works more as it should.
Yes?
I'm a great fan of Michael Connolly's Detective Harry Bosch. And Connolly gives one the impression that in his crime writing, that he personally examines evil and evil deeds at sometimes a disturbing level. And my question is this: when you are writing, do you go through that sort of process? Is there something that shapes the way you use words? Is it something that shapes your plots? Your comments would be welcomed.
I'm one of the many disappointed people who are over 50 by just a little bit, who have found to their horror that there is something amongst us. There are people among us who are just evil.
Yeah.
I have no explanation for it. I do not know why that should be so, why they should be dysfunctional like that. There is that evil which is addressed in some crime writing. There's, in my case, institutional evil, which is the subject matter of my books. But Jassy has a point here that people want to be entertained and they want a happy ending. They want to see the criminals lose and lose in a big way. And in crime fiction, you can make that happen. In reality, of course, we know that justice is not always achieved, but we make that happen.
I think when it comes to evil people, I know this is actually quite a terrible thing to say, and it's probably not my fault, it was just how I was born, but I've always had a fascination with how they think and why they are like they are. And when I was very, very little, and there were these hand puppets in the house, and there were various ones, and there was a tiger and a lion and a princess, and my favorite one was this really, really ugly one with this dreadful black stubble over his evil-looking face, and his name was Fobber the Robber, and I adored this hand puppet. He worshipped the ground he walked on. And, it was probably a very bad thing that this happened, because I kind of ricocheted off unsavory boyfriend after unsavory, dreadful boyfriend during my 20s, sort of, fascinated by any hint of badness or evil or unusualness. Anyway, so probably it was a good thing, because it gave me a lot of material for my bad characters. And I think having been through that, one learns from it, hopefully. And but yes, you do have to get into the mind of a bad person to write about them. It can be a scary place to be. And I think, for me, it's actually probably made me more law-abiding, because the problem with, not that I was ever unlaw-abiding, because the problem with getting into an evil person's mind is that you have to stay there until the conclusion of the book, which means you actually have to experience their punishment. And that can be quite a frightening and a chastening process, and can leave you really deciding that maybe evil was not as sort of flamboyant and romantic and exciting as you thought it was.
I absolutely agree with that. In this Van Buren book, for which we had the book launch just now, required me to go into the mind of a man who was handsome. He was not the monster that one would have imagined. The girls and the women swooned at court when he appeared. They were writing him love letters while he was standing in the dock on trial for his life for having murdered an 18-year-old and disfigured her body. He obviously had raped her before that. I needed to get into his mind, and in order to do that, I had to determine for myself what sort of evil there resided in him. And it was not a nice place to be, because I realized that there were many like him. His was just a particular case that made the news worldwide. And I realized that the wolf in Little Red Riding Hood was probably not a wolf, but a very handsome man. And that is a frightening thought.
Yeah. The last, we've run out of time, but you've been waiting so patiently with the mic in your hand, so you're the last question.
Thank you very much. Just to say thank you for both of you. Just for Chris, just to say that it's kind of brought me hope, because I'm also a lawyer, so and dealt with that whole, you have to have everything concise and...
Guys, hello? The talking stick is with the lady in the front here. Can you all just show respect? It's the last question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And particularly at the moment with the Lotto trial, that's come up, with the previous attorney, I think their first attorney, now published a book about it, which is, I don't know if that kind of reminded you of your first, I didn't know about your first novel getting banned or whatever, but...
Let's get to the question, please.
Yeah, the question is, how do you feel, what is your response to that? I mean, is it from a legal, ethical kind of question?
I'm going to answer that question, but I'm not going to do that here. I'm going to assume that you'll be watching Carte Blanche on Sunday night. I'll be interviewed tomorrow by the Carte Blanche team about that very issue and other issues relating to the Lotto case, which of course is now headlines and has been for the last, I don't know how many weeks. But I will be addressing that. So I hope you'll excuse me for ducking the issue right now.
So, we got a scoop, guys. Chris Marnewick, that you just saw now, you can watch him on Carte Blanche for your Sunday weekly dose of ennui before Blue Monday happens to you. And that's how we end this evening's edition of the Time of the Writer Festival. Thank you so much for your participation. My name is Karabo Kgoleng. Ladies and gentlemen, Jassy, Mackenzie, Chris Marnewick. Good night.